Now, when we talk about Victorian tech, we're referring to a very specific period, 1837 to 1901. This era is known as the Victorian era because it spans from the time Queen Victoria ascended the throne to the time of her death. The era is defined by her reign, both historically and culturally. Within both fiction and real history, science fiction as a genre has been heavily influenced by this time period. I would even argue that cyberpunk is often considered the first punk genre. This is largely because it was the first genre to be explicitly named as a punk genre, even though it appeared much later than the Victorian era. Cyberpunk as a term was coined by writer Bruce Bethke in 1980. He created it as the title of a short story he wrote that same year, later published in Amazing Stories in 1983. The term was used to describe a new generation of rebellious hackers. The word punk itself means rebellion, or it's at least associated with rebellion in most of our society. Punk itself even showed up quite a bit in the rock movement of the 1970s and 1980s, with bands like the Ramones and Red Hot Chili Peppers helping to define its cultural tone. At its core, punk genres are about rebellion. In science fiction, punk genres rebel against traditional sci-fi norms. They have historical eras or contexts and reinterpret them through speculative technology, alternative history, or exaggerated aesthetics. I mentioned this in my previous video, talking about how punk itself has influenced our history and even our culture and a lot of our stories in fiction, especially in science fiction. Punk sci-fi exists to challenge what science fiction is supposed to look like. Some of the earliest proto-punk science fiction stories come from works like Around the World in 80 Days and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. From these foundations, we eventually get a specific cluster of Victorian-era punk genres, which we are talking about today. There are four major Victorian punk genres: Steampunk, Teslapunk, Cowpunk, and Skypunk. You could also include nautical punk, though I'd argue that's a side branch and something better explored on its own in a future video. The genre that truly defines this era, however, is steampunk. Steampunk is the OG. It's the earliest and most influential of the Victorian punk genres. You can even trace its conceptual roots back to figures like Leonardo da Vinci, whose imagined machines resemble early steampunk ideas, even if they later inspired other punk genres as well. Steampunk, Teslapunk, Skypunk, and Cowpunk all stem from Victorian-era technology and aesthetics. Nautical punk fits here too, with examples like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but the four main genres are the focus. So how did these genres fit into the Victorian era, and what defines them? Steampunk dominates the Victorian era because steam and coal were the primary resources of the time. From the pre-industrial revolution through its rapid expansion, steam power revolutionized technology. This includes the rise of trains, steamboats, factories, and large mechanical systems. From 1837 to 1901, steam ruled supreme. As a result, steampunk heavily reflects this reality. Its stories often focus on themes of class conflict, industrialization, revolution, and the loss of freedom and personal liberty. It is the loudest and most socially critical of the Victorian punk genres. Steampunk technology is usually mechanical: clockwork, gears, pistons, and steam-driven machines. Now, at times, robots exist in these realities of steampunk, but they're typically simple and emotionless, unless the story leans into fantasy or magic. Power sources include steam, coal, fire, and sometimes even early electricity. But what's the genre without a couple of examples to show what this genre is all about? Some notable steampunk works include things like Steam Boy, the animated film, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which is a graphic novel and a movie, the book The Difference Engine, written by William Gibson and Bruce Sterling, the video game Guns of Icarus Online, and the new video game coming out on Xbox, Clockwork Revolution. Steampunk is heavily influenced by industrial Western Europe, especially Victorian England, but it also overlaps with early American industrial expansion, particularly trains and steamships. So it begs the question, how did the West take on this magnificent genre and period of technology and fiction? Cowpunk I'd describe as steampunk's American cousin. It uses similar technology but places it in a Wild West setting. Steam trains, early electricity, and mechanical weapons still exist in this punk genre, but the aesthetic shifts to frontier towns, gunslingers, and deserts, bringing on a backdrop that is the Old West rather than a more European style of steampunk. What sets Cowpunk apart is its aesthetic and mythology. It blends steampunk or Teslapunk technology with Old West folklore, superstition, and occasional supernatural elements. That fusion is what makes it a punk genre, rather than just historical fiction. Cowpunk examples include Will Smith's Wild Wild West, Johnny Depp's animated movie Rango, the video game Weird West, Disney's The Lone Ranger, the video game by LucasArts Outlaws, and Desperados 3, the video game. It's really hard to find something that truly fits into this genre, since it's not always fully done right. And to be completely honest, I did a lot of research, and if there is anything that really fits into Cowpunk, I would leave a comment down below in the description. However, there was one shout out I do want to give. The YouTuber Boylei Hobby Time makes amazing videos and model builds of what he calls, if I remember correctly, the imaginary Wild West. This fantastical reimagining of the Wild West has a lot of themes that more accurately fit into Cowpunk. And I'll leave a link in the description below for his channel, but give him a like and a subscribe, and comment down below if you had more examples like I previously mentioned, but also give him some support. If you like Cowpunk or are interested in anything fantastical, or if you like people making miniatures and models, he's the guy to go to. Honestly, he's inspired me heavily. So give him a look and let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Now, the genre emphasizes travel, exploration, and frontier justice, and the stoic grandeur of gunslingers, often incorporating Native American and cowboy folklore, which is very different from steampunk, which focuses more on the social class war between the elite and the poor, rather than going to a lot of fantastical elements. It can and does at times. We see this in the hero shooter Deadlock, but it's not as heavily drawn upon. However, it isn't the only punk of the Victorian era that also took the technology and aesthetic and flipped it on its head. Oh no, Cowpunk was not unique for this alone. For there is another that flipped this entire idea on its head. Or should I say, flipped it onto the clouds. Skypunk sits between steampunk and Teslapunk. It represents the transition from steam to electricity, and often appears toward the end of the Victorian era. Skypunk technology lifts Victorian industry into the sky. Floating cities, airships, and massive flying machines powered by steam, electricity, or even sometimes wind take shape in this part of the genre. These worlds imagine flight before planes or helicopters were common, or even conceptualized, using technology that feels both impossible and imaginative. I would dare say that Around the World in 80 Days is a hodgepodge of some of these genres, and Skypunk and Steampunk most heavily fit into it, especially with the idea of flying around the world in 80 days on a flying machine and other technological wonders that showcase around the world in the book. Notable Skypunk examples include things like one of my favorite video games, BioShock Infinite, Studio Ghibli's Castle in the Sky, the movie or book of Mortal Engines, the video games Skies of Arcadia and Crimson Skies, and the book series The Edge Chronicles. Skypunk leans heavily into fantasy, while still retaining Victorian class divisions. And we see this in things like BioShock Infinite, where the struggle between the religious followers of Comstock and the outsiders and prejudice towards the Vox Populi is seen, with this struggle and war in the skies and the inevitable downfall of the city in the skies known as Columbia. Floating cities often mirror these social hierarchies, with these elites living above and lower classes beneath, sometimes literally watching from the ground. Yet, how does a punk genre reflect the last aspect of the Victorian era in its revolution, an abandonment of the last remnants of the old world? Teslapunk by far is the most disruptive of the Victorian punk genres. Named after Nikola Tesla, it focuses on electricity as a revolutionary force rather than steam. Unlike steampunk, which emphasizes class struggle, Teslapunk focuses on technological upheaval, political instability, and ethical consequences of advancement. Electricity represents freedom, chaos, and unpredictability. Teslapunk worlds explore the idea of what if electricity had been fully embraced. Tesla himself believed in providing electricity freely to the world, which made him unpopular with investors. The philosophy deeply influences Teslapunk themes. Electricity in these stories is powerful, dangerous, and even difficult to control. Some of the greatest examples that I could find include Christopher Nolan's the movie The Prestige, the video game The Order, 1886, Mary Shelley's classic book Frankenstein, and even some elements of Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes movie series. Teslapunk often presents technology that humanity doesn't fully understand, with terrifying or unintended consequences. Teslapunk stands apart because it doesn't quite fit into the Victorian system. It breaks it. It represents a future that could have been, one that was never fully realized due to fear, lack of funding, or resistance to change. All in all, these genres represent the Victorian era's technological imagination. Steampunk on fog-filled cobblestone streets, Cowpunk riding across the frontier, Skypunk soaring above society, and Teslapunk crackling with dangerous potential. These stories explore class division, technological fear, and the question of progress. They ask, what if? And in doing so, They reflect the greatest turning point in Western civilization's technological history. Thank you all for watching this video of punk genres. We'll be tapping into a lot more in the coming weeks, and we're going to be diving into some even more odd and strange punk genres and where they came from. And if you liked this video, give a look at one of my punk genre videos that I did mention nautical punk. This one is totally nautical punk and fits into some of the dynamics that we talked about today in this episode of Tales of the Verse that came out in season 1. I'd watch it and the other ones to get caught up with the show before season 3 comes out next week. And if you like these videos, give a look at the hidden genre videos. Very similar, where I talk about genres that are lesser known in our fiction and stories. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you on the other side of the gates.